At first glance, I wouldn't really know what to make of this one. Very rarely do I look at the answer choices for a grammar question and have trouble identifying the rule. This for one thing is kind of the odd thing here, but I do notice some other things that can keep me grounded, right? I see there's a period. I see there's a period in D here. So already, I'm probably thinking this is going to be that connector placement rule, which involves usually words like however or though, those kind of more transition words, and how they fit within sentences and whether they start a sentence or end a sentence. And I can kind of see here that that's really the difference between A and D, is they both have a period, but the for one is on either side of that. But before I worry about where the for one goes, I'm going to worry about the period. Do I need a period at all? Are there two sentences here? Or is this kind of one long sentence that just needs commas? So let's really emphasize it. And when we do, ignore the for one, right? Whether I choose A or D, for one is kind of this extra little insertion. So I don't want that clouding my understanding of whether or not something is a sentence. So let's take a look. The colon here is also complicating things. So I'll read everything, but really it's after the colon that really matters. During the decades-long movement to codify the rights of Latinos in the U.S., certain events were pivotal. The founding of social justice group, the League of United Latin American Citizens in 1929. Okay, well that follows my colon rules. That's not a sentence, but because the part before the colon is a sentence, then the whole thing is a sentence. So we're good there on that being a sentence. It's weird, and I don't love how it reads, but the colon thing is okay. The colon says there is a sentence before that, so we're good. Step one, accomplished here. Let's look at the next part, though. The Katzenbach versus Morgan court decision in 1966, which affirmed the rights of Latino voters, is another such event. Ooh, that one's sneakier, but that's also a sentence. And I'll highlight what the actual sentence is. It's the Katzenbach versus Morgan court decision in 1966 is another such event, right? This isn't a particularly complicated clause, but the comma with which is inserting an interruption into the sentence. It's providing more information. And we see that interruption is closed off with another comma at the end. So I can just ignore that. And when I do, it sounds very clearly like a sentence. So that requires now, I think, that we need to have, a period. My only concern, though, is the colon might be messing with things. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to be B or C, but I wouldn't necessarily cross them out. This colon is bothering me. But let's try to see how they would fit in. It almost like, in order for B or C to be right, I would need this whole part after to be a single sentence, where the part before the for one kind of flows into the part after. Let's just read the whole thing and see what we get, starting with the part after the colon. The founding of social justice group, the League of United Latin American Citizens in 1929, for one, the Katzenbach versus Morgan court decision in 1966, which affirmed the rights of Latino voters, is another such event. No, okay. In that version, it almost sounds to me like I'm starting a list. And I'm starting a list of like 3 things. But there's only 2 things here. And then one of the things is kind of a sentence and the other isn't. So this is just not a good list. There's no pattern. There's no rhythm. So we cannot kind of combine these things into a list because there's just not enough things, but also because they're just different formats. So I'm now convinced that B and C are wrong. This just does not work. But the for one, I think, needs to be with I think it needs to be with the second part because it's an example. I think for one here is basically a transition that means for example. I don't think I've ever seen that in the transition questions, but I would add that to your list as a potential for example type word. So let me just see here. This is kind of confusing. So, during the decades-long movement to codify the rights of Latinos in the U.S., certain events were pivotal. The founding of social justice group, the League of United Latin American Citizens in 1929, for one. The Katzenbach versus Morgan court decision in 1966 is another such event. Okay. So, for one is setting up, here's our first example, and then another such event is telling us our second example. So I don't want the for one leading in to the second thing. Right? The for one is the founding of the social justice group. Then the second example for 2, which we'd never say, but bear with me, is the Katzenbach versus Morgan court decision. Right? Those are the 2 examples that are giving the decades-long movement to codify the rights of Latinos in the United States, they're giving us those events that were pivotal, right? So that leads me back to, choice D. Yeah. Here's my final check on this one. I would still only do this in about a minute on the real test. It's talking through it that's hard because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But it's basically this is how I would do it, right? I would kind of put the 4-1 where I think it is really applying, right? Where I would write it. During the decades-long movement to codify the rights of the Latinos in the U.S., certain events were pivotal. For one, the founding of social justice group, the League of United Latin American Citizens in 1929. Another such example is Katzenbach versus Morgan Court decision in 1966, which affirmed the rights of Latino voters. I'm flipping things around, which is always risky when we're playing with punctuation and things like that. But now I've kind of moved past the punctuation being the issue and moved into the meaning of this. How does that transition word, that connector word, fit within the other sentences? So I need to look at all three parts, the part before the colon, the part after the colon, and the part after the period. So that's a lot, but I would be convinced that D is the right answer. It is the right answer. And this is tricky, but it still is following that same kind of format that I expect from the connector placement questions. So it's a great example of just like, trust the rules. There's a limited menu of things on the SAT. They can give us weird shades of those rules, different versions of it, but they're all going to kind of still follow the same basic procedure. And so if we're good with that, we should be able to use that procedure to stay on task, even when things kind of pop up that we don't expect, like weird transitions or colons in the middle of these kind of transition questions. That's odd, but it's not that weird. And I was able to kind of roll with it. And that little unpredictable twist ends up being pretty predictable at the end of the day.